She held my hand under fireworks and refused to let go. I had missed my train on purpose. Her restaurant floated on the river, glowing like a secret. I didn't know she was engaged. The fireworks started. And so did the truth. Everyone in Savannah knew her name except mine. That night changed everything I thought I wanted. My name is Josephine Callahan, a freelance photojournalist from Chicago who chased assignments the way other people chased love, restlessly and without commitment. I came to Savannah for a magazine story about river life, never expecting the woman running a floating restaurant would rewrite everything I believed about home. The assignment editor at Coastal Living wanted photos of the 4th of July fireworks reflected on the Savannah River. So I arrived 3 days early to scout locations. My rental dock permit fell through because of a bureaucratic mix-up, leaving me stranded on the riverbank with 2 cameras and no clear vantage point. A weathered sign caught my eye. The Tidewater Floating Restaurant. Est. 1962. Strings of light swaying gently against the darkening summer sky. I walked the gangplank uninvited, hoping someone inside might let me shoot from their deck, rehearsing an apology I never got to finish. A woman in a flower-dusted apron looked up from behind the bar, dark curls escaping a bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows. "We're closed for a private party," she said, though her eyes lingered on my cameras a beat longer than the sentence required. I explained my situation quickly, embarrassed, already turning to leave when she said, "Wait. You said you're documenting the river." Her name was Remy Delacroix Whitfield, and the restaurant had belonged to her grandmother before it belonged to her. Docked at the same pier for 60 years. She offered me a folding chair on the upper deck in exchange for photographs of the party below. Casual, as if strangers did this every day. I spent that first evening photographing wedding guests and stealing glances at Remy, who moved through the crowd like she'd been born on water. When the party ended, she brought me a plate of shrimp and grits without asking, setting it down like a period at the end of a sentence. "You don't talk much for someone who takes pictures of people," she said, studying my face the way I usually studied light. I told her photography let me watch without being watched, and she laughed, low and surprised, like I'd said something true by accident. Before I left that night, she wrote her number on a receipt and said, "Come back Thursday. I'll save you a good seat." I didn't examine why my hands were shaking as I folded that receipt into my jacket pocket, or why I kept it instead of losing it. Thursday came, and I told myself I was only returning for the view, though I changed my shirt 3 times before leaving the hotel. Remy met me at the gangplank with 2 glasses of sweet tea. No menu. Just an assumption that I'd stay through sunset. She showed me her grandmother's old recipe book, pages soft as cloth, and told me the restaurant survived 3 hurricanes and 1 bankruptcy scare. I asked why she never left Savannah, and she said the river was the only thing that never asked her to be someone else. Something in that answer settled in my chest, familiar in a way I couldn't yet name out loud. We fell into an easy rhythm. I photographed the restaurant for a feature. She fed me between shots, and neither of us mentioned time passing. Her staff teased her for lingering near my camera longer than the shots required, and she waved them off without quite denying it. One evening she taught me to shuck oysters, standing close enough that I lost count of how many I dropped. I noticed the calluses on her hands, proof of years spent hauling crates and fixing engines no one else wanted to touch. She noticed the scar above my eyebrow and asked about it directly. No polite hesitation, just honest curiosity that disarmed me completely. I told her about the car accident that ended my sister's life, and started my habit of leaving places before they could leave me first. Remy didn't offer sympathy I could deflect. She just refilled my glass and let the silence hold what words couldn't. We started meeting after her closing shift, walking the Riverwalk while the city cooled down around us like a held breath. She pointed out constellations her grandmother taught her, half made up, half real. And I photographed her hands tracing them in the dark. I extended my magazine deadline twice, telling my editor the light wasn't right yet, which wasn't entirely a lie. Remy mentioned once, almost carelessly, that her family expected her to marry well and marry soon, and I filed the comment away uneasily. I asked what well meant, and she changed the subject fast enough that I understood the answer without hearing it. We spent the 4th of July planning weekend photographing pelicans along the marsh. Her laughter loud enough to scatter the birds twice. She called me her favorite trespasser now, and I stopped correcting her, secretly proud of the title. One humid night, she leaned her shoulder against mine on the dock railing, and neither of us moved away for a long time. I realized I'd stopped counting the days until my assignment ended, which frightened me more than any deadline ever had. Remy told me about her grandmother's death 3 years earlier, how the restaurant became both her inheritance and her cage. I asked if she was happy, and she said happiness felt like a luxury she hadn't budgeted for yet. That answer stayed with me long after I left the dock, turning over in my mind like a stone I couldn't skip past. We started texting constantly, my phone lighting up with photos of sunrise catches and bad puns about crab legs. I photographed her without her noticing once, laughing at something a regular customer said, and it became my favorite picture of the summer. Her best friend and sous chef, Nia, pulled me aside and warned me gently that Remy didn't let people in easily, so I should be careful with what I'd been given. I promised Nia I had no intention of leaving carelessly, though privately I wasn't sure my plane ticket agreed with that promise. One evening Remy cooked for just the two of us after closing. Candles instead of string lights. Jazz instead of customer chatter. I don't usually do this, she admitted. Refilling wine she barely touched. Hands unsteady in a way I found strangely comforting. I told her I didn't usually stay anywhere long enough to matter, and she said maybe that was about to change for both of us. We didn't kiss that night, but the space between us shrank until it felt like a held breath waiting to be released. My editor called demanding the final photo set, and I lied again, saying the fireworks feature needed one more week on location. Remy started leaving little things for me at the hostess stand, a sketch, a note, a flower pressed flat between napkins. I kept every single one in a manila folder labeled Coastal Living Research, a title that fooled absolutely no one, especially not me. We finally kissed on the upper deck during a summer storm, rain soaking through both our shirts while the restaurant emptied around us. Neither of us said anything meaningful afterward. We just stood there grinning like teenagers who'd gotten away with something enormous. I told Remy I was falling for her, quietly, testing the words in the dark to see if they'd hold weight. She kissed me again instead of answering, which felt like an answer anyway, warm and certain against the cooling rain. The next morning she introduced me to her regulars as my Joe, and something in my chest cracked open, gently, permanently. I started imagining a version of my life that included a floating restaurant and a woman who made grits taste like belonging. Remy's mother called while we sat on the dock, and Remy's face shuddered closed the moment she saw the caller ID. She stepped away to take it, and when she came back her hands were tight around her mug, knuckles pale. "My mother wants me to meet someone for dinner Friday," she said carefully, watching my reaction more than the river. I asked who, and she said a family friend's son, David Ashford Bell, whose family owned half the Marina District downtown. I told myself it was nothing, an obligation dinner, the kind families forced on people who couldn't yet say no. Remy squeezed my hand and promised it meant nothing, but her eyes carried a weight I didn't yet understand. I chose to believe her, because believing her was easier than imagining an ending to a summer that had only just begun. 2 weeks later, Remy's mother, Patricia Delacroix, arrived at the restaurant unannounced, silk scarf perfect despite the humidity, eyes sweeping over me like an inventory. She introduced herself politely but pointedly asked if I was one of Remy's photography clients, a question that drew a clean, careful line. Remy answered before I could, calling me a friend, and the word landed between us like a small, deliberate wound. After Patricia left, Remy apologized, explaining her mother didn't know about us and wasn't ready to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I asked what there was to know, needing to hear her say it plainly, needing the shape of us confirmed in words. That I love someone who isn't David, she said finally. And my heart lifted even as her face stayed tight with fear. The dinner with David happened anyway. A family obligation Remy couldn't cancel without explanations she wasn't ready to give. I told her I understood. Though I spent that Friday night photographing empty docks instead of sleeping, jealousy dressed up as professionalism, David turned out to be kind when I finally met him properly, quiet, a little sad-eyed, oddly easy to talk to. He and Remy had grown up together. Families intertwined through decades of charity galas and shared summers on Tybee Island. Patricia began appearing more frequently, always with a reason, inspecting the books, questioning suppliers, mentioning David's name like a chess move. I learned from Nia that the restaurant owed back taxes and a renovation loan, numbers large enough to make Patricia's interest feel less like meddling. Remy admitted the bank had sent a warning letter about the loan, and her mother's solution involved a marriage, not a spreadsheet. David's family could pay it off in an afternoon, Remy said bitterly, staring at the water instead of me. I asked if she was actually considering it, and her silence answered more honestly than any denial could have. My magazine editor called with news that reshaped everything. Corporate wanted a companion piece on struggling Savannah businesses, and the Tidewater fit perfectly. I refused at first, citing conflict of interest, but my editor reminded me my contract renewal depended on delivering strong, timely stories. I didn't tell Remy about the assignment, choosing silence the way she'd chosen silence with her mother. A hypocrisy I recognized too late. Nia noticed me taking notes on receipts and delivery schedules one afternoon, and asked carefully what exactly I was working on. I lied and said research for the original piece, watching her expression cooled by exactly 1 degree. Enough to notice. Patricia hosted a formal engagement dinner announcement for Remy and David before Remy had ever actually agreed to anything. I found out through a community newsletter. Remy's photo beside David's under a headline about Savannah's next power couple. I confronted her that night, hurt bleeding into anger faster than I could control it, demanding to know if any of this was real. Remy swore she hadn't agreed, that her mother had moved without permission, desperate and out of options with the bank deadline looming. I didn't fully believe her. Not that night. Not with the newsletter still crumpled in my fist between us. I told her I couldn't keep loving someone who let her mother write the story of her own life for her. She asked if I understood what it meant to risk everything: family, legacy, the only home she'd ever known, for something uncertain. I said love was supposed to be worth that risk. And she said easy words came cheap from someone who'd never had to choose. We didn't speak for 4 days. The longest 4 days I'd spent in Savannah since arriving. I threw myself into the struggling businesses article, telling myself work would fill the silence Remy had left behind. Nia found my draft notes accidentally left on a table, and read enough to understand exactly what I'd been doing. She confronted me furiously, calling me a coward who'd used Remy's trust as material, and I had no defense that didn't sound hollow. I tried to explain the assignment had started before I fell for Remy, but timelines didn't soften the betrayal Nia clearly felt on her friend's behalf. Nia threatened to tell Remy everything unless I killed the story myself, and I agreed immediately, ashamed it had taken an ultimatum. I called my editor and refused the assignment outright, risking the contract renewal I'd been protecting all summer. My editor warned me this decision would cost me future assignments, and I said some things mattered more than bylines. I drove to the restaurant to tell Remy everything before Nia could, needing her to hear it from me first. She wasn't there. David was sitting alone at the bar with 2 untouched drinks, looking as trapped as I felt. David admitted quietly that the engagement announcement had surprised him too, that his own life held complications his family didn't know about. He told me, carefully, that he'd never planned to actually marry Remy, that the arrangement served purposes neither mother fully understood. Pressed him, and he finally admitted he was gay, in love with a man named Theo, hidden from both families for years. The engagement, he explained, was a shield for both of them, Remy avoiding suspicion about her own life, him avoiding his father's fury.
Isetztond.
Realizing the rival everyone feared was actually an unwitting ally. Trapped in the same performance as Remy, David asked me not to tell anyone yet. Terrified of losing his father's business and his own fragile peace, and I promised to wait. Remy returned to find us talking quietly and misread the scene entirely, her face closing like a door slammed by wind. "Of course," she said bitterly. "The two of you." Comparing notes on how to leave me, and walked out before I could explain. I chased her onto the dock, the humid night pressing close, and blurted David's secret before I could stop myself. She stopped walking, turned slowly, and asked if I was certain. Her voice caught somewhere between hope and disbelief. I told her everything David had confided, watching relief and fury cross her face in the same breath, tangled together. "He let me carry this alone," she said, more hurt than angry, understanding suddenly how much fear shaped both their lives. Remy confronted David the next day, and instead of anger, they ended up laughing bitterly at how thoroughly they'd both been cornered. Together they agreed the fake engagement had to end, though neither knew how to tell their families without detonating everything. Patricia arrived at the restaurant demanding to know why wedding caterers had been cancelled, her composure cracking for the first time I'd witnessed. Remy told her mother plainly that she wouldn't marry David, that she was in love with a woman, that the lie ended now. Patricia's silence stretched long and cold before she said quietly that Remy's grandmother would be ashamed, and left without another word. I found Remy afterward sitting on the restaurant's lowest deck, staring at water that had never asked her for anything false. She told me her grandmother's will actually required marriage before Remy could inherit the restaurant outright, a clause Patricia had been protecting all along. Without marriage, ownership reverted to a distant cousin, who wanted to sell the dock to developers building a hotel. I asked why she never told me about the clause, and she said saying it aloud made the threat feel permanent. The bank sent a final notice, 90 days to pay the renovation loan in full or face foreclosure on the restaurant. Remy stopped sleeping, running numbers late into the night, trying to find a version of the future that didn't require betraying herself. I offered to help however I could, and she snapped that photographs wouldn't save a 60-year-old restaurant from a bank's deadline. We fought again, exhaustion and fear making both of us sharper than we meant to be, words landing harder than intended. I left that night unsure if I was still welcome, driving to my hotel through streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. My editor called again, offering a permanent staff position in Chicago, a real salary, real stability, everything I'd claimed to want for years. I didn't answer immediately, staring at my phone, aware that accepting meant leaving Savannah in 11 days regardless of what happened with Remy. Nia called, voice tight, saying Remy had barely eaten in 2 days and refused to talk about anything but spreadsheets. I went back to the restaurant despite our fight, finding Remy asleep at a table surrounded by unpaid invoices and cold coffee. I didn't wake her. I just sat across from her until dawn, watching the woman I loved carry a weight built by people long dead. When she woke, she apologized first, softer than before, and I told her the Chicago offer without softening any of it. She asked if I'd already decided, and I said I hadn't, because deciding meant choosing between two things I actually wanted. A local paper somehow got wind of the broken engagement and the foreclosure threat, running a story that painted Remy as scandal and failure. I suspected my earlier notes had somehow reached a rival reporter through my old editor. Guilt curdling in my stomach immediately. I called my editor furious, and he admitted, unapologetically, that unused research sometimes circulated between contacts at competing outlets. I quit the magazine entirely that afternoon, severing ties with the only steady career I'd built, unwilling to be complicit further. Remy read the article alone before I could warn her, her expression unreadable when I finally found her on the dock. "Did you give them this?" she asked quietly. And I understood then how fragile trust remained even after everything we'd survived. I explained the leak wasn't intentional, that I'd killed my own story weeks ago. But doubt had already found a foothold between us. David showed up that evening, publicly, holding Theo's hand at the restaurant entrance, choosing honesty despite the article's damage already done. His father disowned him within the hour. A phone call loud enough that half the dock overheard every furious word. Remy held David while he cried. The two of them finally free of a lie that had cost them both dearly. Watching them, I understood love sometimes demanded losing everything familiar before anything true could actually begin. Patricia returned again, this time quieter, watching her daughter comfort a broken man instead of the marriage she'd engineered. She asked Remy, voice unsteady, whether I made her happy, and Remy said yes without a single second of hesitation. Patricia didn't say she approved, only that she needed time, which felt like the smallest, most honest gift she'd offered all summer. The foreclosure deadline crept closer. 61 days remaining, and no clear path existed to save the restaurant from developers circling like gulls. I told Remy I was staying in Savannah regardless of Chicago, regardless of the restaurant's fate, because I wanted to build something real for once. She kissed me hard on the dock in front of stunned regulars, unbothered now by who might be watching or what they'd say. We spent the next week searching for investors, community fundraisers, anything that might buy the restaurant enough time to survive. Nia rallied the regulars into a grassroots campaign. Old photographs and stories flooding social media under the tag Save the Tidewater. A local historical society flagged the restaurant as culturally significant, offering a small grant that helped but didn't fully close the gap. I photographed the whole campaign, this time honestly. This time for Remy instead of for a byline that once mattered more. Patricia, unexpectedly, contacted an old family friend on the city council about historic preservation funding neither of us had known existed. I realized then that Patricia's love for her daughter had never disappeared, only tangled itself painfully around fear and old expectations. With 11 days left before deadline, the number still fell short by an amount that felt both small and impossibly large. Remy told me she'd rather lose the restaurant honestly than keep it by marrying a lie. And I believed her completely. The 4th of July arrived exactly as the deadline clock ticked past its final week, the whole city humming with holiday noise. Remy decided to open the Tidewater for one last fireworks celebration, calling it either a farewell or a fighting chance. She wasn't sure which. I published a personal essay independently online, not for any magazine, telling the true story of a restaurant, family, and a love worth saving. The piece went unexpectedly viral overnight, shared past Savannah into cities that had never heard of a floating restaurant on a Georgia river. Donations poured into the fundraiser page faster than any of us could refresh the screen, strangers typing kind words alongside their contributions. Patricia appeared that morning with a check from her own savings, sliding it across the bar without ceremony, eyes wet but proud. "Your grandmother left you more than a building," she told Remy quietly. And I almost let fear make me forget that. By afternoon, the fundraiser had closed most of the gap, the historical grant and community donations finally matching what the bank required. A local credit union, moved by the online attention, offered to restructure the remaining loan at manageable terms instead of foreclosure. Remy called the bank with trembling hands, and when she hung up, she just stood there, unable to speak for a full minute. "We kept it," she finally said, and the whole restaurant erupted into noise, hugging, someone popping a bottle of cheap champagne. David arrived with Theo, both wearing matching relief. His father's disownment softened slightly by an uncle willing to fund his new bakery instead. Nia cried harder than anyone, insisting it was allergies, while hugging me so tightly I nearly dropped my camera into the river. As evening fell, guests crowded the deck, the same deck where I'd once begged to shoot photographs of someone else's wedding party. Remy found me near the railing, the same spot from our first night, and handed me a glass of sweet tea without a word. "You saved this place," she said. And I told her she'd saved herself first, which mattered infinitely more than any building. The first firework cracked open the sky, gold sparks scattering across the river like something spilled and beautiful and impossible to take back. Remy took my hand, fingers lacing through mine in front of her mother, her staff, her whole complicated, healing family. "I'm not letting go this time," she said, echoing words neither of us had said aloud yet but had clearly both been thinking. I told her I wasn't planning on leaving anywhere she wasn't. Chicago and bylines finally sounding smaller than they once had. Patricia stood a few feet away, watching us without flinching, something like acceptance settling slowly into her tired shoulders. More fireworks bloomed overhead, red and violet reflected twice on the water, once above and once below, doubling the light around us. Remy leaned close and said her grandmother always claimed the best fireworks were the ones you watched holding someone who mattered. I asked if I qualified, and she laughed, kissed me under the loudest burst yet, and said I'd qualified since the night I trespassed uninvited. David proposed a toast, thanking Remy for the courage to be honest, and thanking me, oddly, for chasing a story that became a rescue instead. I raised my glass to a summer that started with a bureaucratic mix-up and ended with a life I hadn't known I was hunting for. Nia announced the Tidewater would reopen full-time in September. Renovations funded. Debt manageable. Future finally steadier than it had been in years. Patricia approached us quietly and said dinner Sunday. Both of us. No scarves. No scripts. Just family learning a new shape. Remy squeezed my hand at that, disbelief and joy crossing her face like weather changing all at once. I realized I'd finally found the thing photography always tried and failed to capture. A moment I didn't need a camera to keep. The final firework burst wide and slow, painting the whole river gold before fading gently into ordinary darkness. Remy whispered that she loved me, plainly, without fear attached to the words for the first time all summer. I said it back, certain in a way I'd never let myself be certain about anything, or anyone, before her. The crowd began drifting toward the gangplank, but we stayed, watching smoke drift low across water that had witnessed our entire beginning. I thought about my sister, about leaving places before they could leave me, and understood I'd finally stopped running. Savannah, I realized, hadn't been an assignment at all. It had been the place I was always supposed to land. A year later, we stood on that same deck for another 4th of July, married quietly that spring with Patricia crying happily in the front row. The fireworks lit the water again, and Remy held my hand the way she promised she always would, steady, certain, and completely unafraid. Then